Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. If you can, please do turn on your videos. Keep the audio silent until you have a question to ask. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Stephen Turban to our class to learn about his entrepreneurial journey. Stephen Turban is co-founder of Lumiere Education with the mission to create world-class research and mentorship opportunities for talented students all over the world. Stephen grew up in Columbia, Missouri, where I have lived for 4 years in a previous life, and studied at Harvard College. After college, he worked at McKinsey in the Boston and Beijing offices. He then started in the PhD program at Harvard Business School before dropping out to co-found Lumiere Education. Stephen is multilingual. In addition to English, he is also fluent in Mandarin, Vietnamese, and Spanish. He now lives in Vietnam, where he's also a part-time stand-up comedian, the only white stand-up comedian in Vietnamese, in his own words. Is that correct, Stephen?
In his own words is like a great way to end it. Yeah, all of that. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited. Thank you guys so much. Oh, thank you for everyone. I was gonna say thank you, Ryan, because you're the only one at first put on your video, but thank you everyone else also for throwing the video because it's nice to see who I'm talking to. Yeah, thank you,
Perfect.
Dr.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for taking the time to talk with us today. Let me start with the first question. Can you tell us more about your business? The students did look at the website, but anything else you can tell about the business would be wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. So Lumiere, it's a really nerdy business. I'll just talk about maybe like 3 evolutions of the business really briefly. So it's an online research program for high school students. That's like the most simple way to put it. The way to think about it is like you're like a really nerdy, ambitious student, and you're thinking about applying to like universities in the US. Maybe you're outside the US, maybe you're inside the US, and you're grinding on test scores, you're grinding on your GPA, and you're also thinking like, what else could I do in addition to that to really stand out? And what a lot of students are realizing is that doing research is a great way for them to kind of stand out when they're applying to college. And so what we do is we're kind of a middleman. We're also, sometimes we're like a research program, like we're somewhere between a summer camp and like just like a matching platform. We pair students with researchers, usually PhD students, and the students pay us a tuition, and then we usually pay the researcher some percentage of that. And the student does a research project kind of under the mentorship of the PhD student. So it's really the student's own research. So that's like essentially how we started. We've grown that as like we started with like 12 really nerdy students in COVID times. I was a mentor for one of them, and now we have about 3,000 students we work with. And then over the past couple of years, we've also started other education brands. So we run like an internship program for high school students. We run an AI program for high school students called Veritas AI. We run a entrepreneurship program for high school students called Young Founders Lab. So these are different kind of brands. And then this past year, we've started acquiring other brands. So now we're kind of in this like stage where we're using our kind of cash flow to acquire other education companies and then kind of consolidate them into a group and use kind of our efficiencies and our channels to then have more students in the program. So that's kind of but it's a really nerdy like company, honestly, just like nerdy students, nerdy team members. That's kind of like the structure.
Wonderful. And I think John Powell had a question about what inspired you to co-found. So John,
Yes,
do you want to go
sir.
ahead?
What inspired you to co-founder Lumiere Education?
Yeah, so I feel like, I don't know, John, if you feel this way, but like I feel like there's often like the really like romantic story people talk. And for me, like my dad's a professor. I kind of grew up surrounded by research. I'm really excited by the prospects of getting students involved in doing research. I did research in high school, and I was like with one of my dad's colleagues. Actually, it was like a really random experience. I was like taking down like company values into an Excel sheet. It was like just quite random, but I actually learned a lot, and I felt like, man, it's really interesting to get more students involved in it. So there's definitely like a values alignment piece there. I thought that was like cool to do, but practically what also happened was that I was in when I was working at McKinsey, I was in China, and I met a few entrepreneurs there who are running kind of a similar type of company, like a online research program for high school students. And then right around when COVID hit, I was thinking, man, I was in this PhD program. Do I want to be a professor or not? Or maybe I want to be an entrepreneur. And I thought, what could I potentially start? And frankly, I was just like, oh, I saw this model that existed in China, but I don't see it in Vietnam. I don't see it in the US. I don't see it in India. Maybe I could just try it. And so a lot of the start was just like me being like, I kind of want I want to try to start something. And so I was just like, oh, let me see what ideas exist that I think I could do. And I was already a PhD student, so I thought maybe this is a good idea. So I thought that was like, there's this very practical piece where I was just like kind of trying to figure out what I could do. And then to kind of avoid continuing doing my PhD, honestly, is like part of it. So yeah, anything to get out of class, I think was my attitude at that point.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Sarah Hager has a question about what fields of research. So Sarah, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, so I was looking at the website and I saw that you have like a lot of science and business stuff, but
Yeah.
I'm an English major, so like if I was in high school and I wanted to do English research, specifically literature, would you like have a availability for that?
Yeah. For sure. You know, maybe you know, I don't know, Sarah, if you want to go back in time to high school, we could talk about that. That could be exciting. But we do. So what happened? It's really interesting. So we started off as so I was a kind of a business school like PhD student, which is like super random. I mean, I guess Dr. Gupta, you are also that, so I don't want to say it's so random, but it's a little random. It's kind of like doing PhD in business and whatnot. So we had some students interested in that. My co-founder was it's kind of similar. And so then we kind of just recruited friends. And we do have students who do English related stuff. The kind of interesting thing is that the more students do STEM research, I find. And so that's why we kind of like put it on our website. Like there's an interesting thing I find with like startups where like there's a thing you want to have happen and there's a thing that like people want to have happen. And then sometimes you kind of have to like find the middle ground there. And so we want to get more students actually involved in like humanities, social sciences, but a lot of students are like just grinding on like bio research. And so we have to talk a lot about that. But we definitely do have students who do it. And those are usually the coolest students who do the best. And nothing against the biology students, but they're usually more creative students, I find, who end up doing better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And Stephen's father was also a business professor, and he was my mentor in the PhD program. So it's not as random as he made it sound, but sort of there's a reason, I guess, behind why he chose business, I guess. Yeah. So Davis, are you there? Davis had a question about, I don't know if he's there. Okay, so we'll go to Ryan's question then about revenue model. Ryan, do you want to ask that?
Yeah, I was gonna ask what your revenue model was, and then you said it was a tuition. And then that had me wondering if you started out with the SaaS model originally, or did you start with a different pricing model and move to the SaaS model? And also, was the SaaS more attractive to the investors for the startup or other revenue models?
Yeah, and when you say SaaS model, are you like referring to like recurring, or can you say a bit more about that?
Recurring. Yeah, the subscription, tuition, SaaS.
Yeah, so it's really and and like part about the second piece of your question is like, is that more attractive to investors? Like,
yeah, which part of your revenue model was the most attractive part? Because you said you had like camps and summer camps and whatnot, and I was wondering if the reoccurring revenue part was the most attractive.
Yeah, you know, it's super interesting, right? So I thought that's an awesome question. And so the way it works, it's I actually think like revenue models are kind of interesting, though they're like kind of also like esoteric. The way it works is that it's really simple actually. Students pay a tuition, so it's actually not recurring. Students pay a one-time tuition fee. It's somewhere between like $2,000 to $5,000. It's kind of expensive, but it's like, you know, a bunch of students get financial aid, but some students pay $2,000 to $5,000 for the fee. They pay us upfront, and then we pay our mentors like somewhere between 2 to 5 months later. So, and then we pay them some percentage of that. So we have like anything else above that is like our margin. The interesting about that is that it creates this like what's called like a positive cash flow cycle. So it's like the more students that you bring on, and these guys are part-time mentors, that means that we have cash kind of upfront. And then we're kind of getting a loan actually from students, and then we can kind of do whatever we want with it. Like we could like go and like, so actually sometimes we invest it like S&P 500, which is like, maybe we should talk about that. But like sometimes you do, you're just like, oh, let's invest it. Like, because it's just like a loan that you're getting, and then you can use whatever you want. Of course, you have to have the money to then pay off your mentor. So don't go crazy with it. Like don't buy like too much Dogecoin, but like whatever you want, you can do with it. And then you pay it out. So that's the model. We've considered like, what if we did some recurring, actually started another business, which is like an assistant. We place assistants with founders called Leverage. And that's a recurring revenue model. And I do think investors like recurring revenue models, but in my experience, actually, they're not as amazing as they sound, because in a recurring revenue model, every month you need to make sure that the person doesn't hate you, which is essentially right. Like, but like, so every month you have an opportunity for them to hate you, which happens a lot, by the way, for me. Like, and so, but if you just have them pay you once, then you're kind of like, sweet, like, they can't, like, they're kind of already done. So even if you mess up, they're kind of giving you the money. So yeah, so that's the model. But does that make sense? I don't know if that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think recurring revenue model is cool, but just be like, you have to do a good job, unfortunately.
I was gonna ask also, so you're just the middleman and you're just the platform. Is the content up to the mentors based on like how they mentor their students? That's all them, because you pick the best mentors from the best colleges in the country.
Yeah, that's generally true. On the website, we don't write like we're just the middleman, but like that is kind of what's going on, to be honest. Like we do a lot of structure. We also have like a pretty team is about 80 people. We have a pretty like built out operational team that's like, following up with students, making sure they're making submissions, like helping them as they submit their research to like publications or competitions. But to be honest, you're totally right, Ryan. It's like at the end of the day, it's like there's awesome people like your professors or researchers who are working with students, and they're the real like content experts, and then we're just supporting that learning experience for them.
Got it. Yeah.
Wonderful. So Stephen, as you can imagine, one of the common questions from students was sort of around the fact that you live in Vietnam. So Hannah, you had a question about why Vietnam? Is that correct, Hannah?
Yes, I just asked, like, why did you choose Vietnam? How did you pro con moving there?
Yeah, I like that. You're like, why?
Yeah.
what are you doing? Yeah, so for me, it's there's just a joyous part of it, and then there's like just a very selfish piece, and there's like a kind of more strategic piece. The selfish piece is that I really like learning languages. And that's just like a pastime. So I came to Vietnam after college to study Vietnamese. I thought it'd be kind of fun. I had some friends who are Vietnamese. It's growing really quickly. It's an economy. It's one of the fast growing economies. And I just really liked it. If you guys haven't been to Vietnam, you guys should totally come. It's like so wild and fun. It's like, and actually like, I'll share my contact information. You guys should hit me up if you come. Would love to see you. It's like such like amazing parties, like great people. It's awesome. Great weather. It's really fun. So it's an amazing place to be. There's so much energy. It's growing really quickly. So when I came, I just felt like, man, I just really like this place. So like, it's not so strategic, actually. It's not like, I was just like, I really like this place. And then I left actually for a couple of years. I was in the US, I was in China, but I really kept coming back to it. I kept thinking, man, I really want to be here. And now I have like this weird, like side life as like a stand-up comedian in Vietnam, which is like super random and fun. But the other more strategic piece is that the way the company works is we're virtual first. And one really interesting opportunity, I think, for people who are willing to make a move is to build companies outside the US, but facing the US market. And what that does is that it allows you to hire people who are really talented, but like the average college graduate in Vietnam is making maybe $600 a month, And so if you get like the top person in Vietnam, they might make like $900 a month, $1,000 a month. And that would be like a kick-ass salary. They'd be like balling. They have like the best like motorbike. It'd be like, their lives would be awesome. And for you, of course, it's way less expensive than if you hired someone in the US. And usually, and I think the opportunity there for the entrepreneurs is to say, well, that means I have a lot more of like my potential profits, then reinvest in the business, hire more people, do more things. So my team is like 80 people, but maybe 75 of them are outside the US. And so that's why being in Asia is, I think, a really big advantage. Yeah. And even this idea, for Lumiere came because I was in China and I kind of got exposed to just a different set of ideas. So I do think there's also like kind of a learning piece to it. But it's like 80% fun, Hannah, honestly. It's like 80% like just like having fun and like just like, playing around, 20% like, oh, like you can like build a more like, cost-effective business. And then there's a piece about learning as well. Yeah.
So culturally, so I'm an international business minor. So culturally, what were like the problems and struggles you had to like learn about the Vietnam culture, and how did you have to like kind of change your or structure your business to meet that Vietnam culture, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So the business is virtual first. So the weird thing about that is that we have team members in Vietnam, but we also have a lot of people in India. We also have a lot of people like we have like 40 people in India, with like 50 people in the Philippines. So it's like it's not even just a Vietnam thing. It's like, how do you create a environment that people want to work at who are from Mumbai, from Manila, from Ho Chi Minh City, someone in LA. Like it's kind of it's a I think that's actually the trick. That's the big question. It's less just reframe it a little bit. It's a little bit less about Vietnam. It's more about like, how do we create this multicultural team? I would say, first of all, we're trying to figure it out. Like, so if you like, and I want to use your minor to help us out, like certainly that's something we're trying to figure out. I do think at the end of the day, though, it comes down to like, are you hiring people who are really good, who are kind, care about each other, and do you trust them? And I think one thing that's amazing about the US, and I don't think like as Americans, we don't see it because we're like living in it, we're like the fish in the water, is that the work culture is really trust-based. People are like, oh, you're doing your job, just go do it. Like, I'm not going to check in on you every day. But that's not the work environment in a lot of places like India and Vietnam. So if you hire high performers and you trust them, it's actually kind of a unique experience for people. And you also give them mentorship. And you say, hey, here's where I want you to go in the future. And I think you can grow and you can lead this company or do whatever. People, I think, tend to react quite well to it. And so there's a lot of really good things about the US culture, work culture, actually. It's highly mentor-based, like people are really invested. And so a lot of it is us taking fundamentals that really work in like kind of startup culture in the US, bringing it here, and then hiring really good people who kind of thrive in that kind of autonomous environment. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And Hannah, I believe that was Sophie's question as well. So you
Oh, I stole it. Sorry.
Thank you, though. But Stephen, coming back to sort of my list of questions, when you first started discussing this business idea with people, what were the reactions of people around you? Did you hear the famous words, that will not work?
That's a good question. Yeah. To be honest, this was so it was COVID era. So like, just to take you guys back, it was like March 2020. The world is like everything is like dying. And so we are like, hey, we're an online summer program for high school students. What do you think? And I think at that point, people were like, literally anything, please give me this thing. So that was really good, like product market fit. And it was also because like, everyone's stuck at home. So I think at first, I think I was really lucky, actually. We hit product market fit, I think, quite quickly. So anyways, that was really nice. So that like almost immediately we had students who are paying. That was such a cool experience. People were like sending me money on my PayPal. It was like my personal PayPal. I had all this money in my PayPal. I was like, let's go. Like, it was amazing. I did prior to that try out another idea, which is around like helping students out with their gap years, which is a terrible idea, and I totally failed. So like, there's definitely like, failures before it works. I would say that the piece that I got for a while was people were like, people would be like, oh, you're doing this business. Oh, it must be, is it like kind of like, people call it like a lifestyle business? Because we didn't raise any like venture capital. We decided to just go bootstrap it. And I think people kind of felt like, oh, you're doing this kind of education thing. That's really cute. And for me, that was kind of annoying because I was like, oh, I think I'm ambitious, and like, they're like, oh, you're doing this cute little education company. And so that was a piece I think I had to kind of like, first of all, just ignore, because who cares what other people think. But I think that's the reaction I got more from friends who are like, I don't know, doing these like finance companies or private equity or whatever. I don't know. They're all this cool stuff, which is also cool. So I think it was, for me, it was just more about, hey, like, this is just my lane. I think it's cool. I think it's going to work, and it is working. So like, kind of, who cares if it's not like the, you know, the Uber or the Airbnb or whatever that that you read about. No.
So you're saying people thought it was cool, not really, they didn't see much potential in it, I guess, given that they were more inclined to see tech-based or finance, fintech kind of companies.
Yeah, I think people like, you know, I think people tend to just look at like yeah, like, did you raise money? We didn't raise money. So I was like, oh, you must like not be a real business, like a real startup. So that was one. I was like, oh, you like, are you really techie? And we're like, oh, we're actually not that techie. Like, oh, so you must not be like a real startup, you know? It's like, oh, you're like not based in San Francisco. Oh, you're like in Ho Chi Minh. That's kind of random. That's admittedly random. Oh, that's like, you're not. So I just, you know, there's a lot of pieces like, oh, it doesn't check these boxes for me. It must be kind of like an unambitious kind of thing that you're doing.
Okay.
I think most of my friends thought I was just like dude hanging out on a beach in Bali, like, you know, smoking a lot and kind of sipping a coconut, you know, which is totally fine. That's also a great life. But yeah.
Max has a question about what your experience was explaining this to parents, but I'll let Max ask that.
Yeah, so it's, you know, when you got out of or when you dropped out of the PhD program at Harvard, what the process was, you know, explaining to your parents and family, you know, why you were doing that and kind of how they reacted to it.
You know, my dad is like a really interesting character. He's a business school professor himself. And so I think there was a part of him that was pretty excited when I started a PhD. But he is someone who really, I mean, I'm just talking about my personal experience. So maybe there's no life lesson here about like, you know, Max, if you have my dad as a father, we could talk about that at some point. You know, he has this my parents are from Hawaii. They really don't care about like succeeding in life. This is my impression of them. I really don't think they care. Like, I remember once I was back in my family's house and I was with my cousin. I told them, hey, we just hit $1 million in revenue. And I was so stoked. I was like, I showed them. My mom was like, oh my God, that's so sweet. And then my cousin came up and then he said, hey, I just won a really hard pickleball match. My mom was like, that is so sweet. It was like an identical level of excitement. So my parents really, I genuinely don't think care. You know, like I mean that a lot. Like I just don't think they really care. And so when I told them I was quitting, I think like I was dropping out. I think they were like, that's fine. I don't know how to react to that. You live in Vietnam. That's also kind of weird. So I don't think they were so. I think my dad was a little bit disappointed. I'm sure there's a small piece of him that would have liked to have talked about research, but he was already retired at that point. So I don't even know. I think it was a bit harder for me actually to talk to my PhD mentors, for whom I felt a little bit like I was saying, hey, actually, I don't want your life. But actually, a lot of them were like, it was so funny. Actually, I was like, sorry, Max, is a long answer, but it was so funny to tell my PhD mentor. I was like telling them, I was like, oh my God, I'm like dropping out. And dude, they were so stoked. They were like, no way, you're doing a startup? Like, you should go do that. That sounds awesome. It's like one guy like looked wistfully in the distance and he was like, man, I wish I'd done a startup. So it's actually pretty funny. So in general, people are really supportive, I found. I think that's a good cultural thing. People are like pretty happy, I think, to support people doing startups. I felt. So I never felt like people were like, what the heck are you doing? Why are you like, you know, wasting this opportunity you have?
And Stephen, your dad was my academic father during the PhD program and after. And I do agree with you. He never put any pressure to succeed in any particular way, at least on me. And that is liberating in some way, because then you can choose to do what you want. And if high success is the path you want to take, well, then so be it.
Yeah, totally.
So, okay. Sarah Kate Rhodes had a question. SRK?
Yeah, hey, I had a question, just like, what did the process of deciding to drop out of the PhD program look like? Like, why not go ahead and finish? You know, did you not want the backup plan, the like safety plan that everybody kind of talks about there?
Yeah. By the way, you have such a great name. You should like really go into like, I don't know, something, politics.
Thank you. Thank you.
A second. Uh, Yeah. So what actually happened is kind of funny. Is it's kind of funny. So, but I was actually doing both at once, by the way. So I started the company. I was still doing my PhD. This is COVID, and then uh, and then my academic advisor called me in actually. So the kind of head of the PhD is like administrator called me in, and then it was really, and I thought I was like, I don't know, maybe she thought I was like gonna tell me I was doing a great job or something. I don't know. And then we get on the Zoom call, and then she's like, "Can I show you something, Stephen?" And then she clicked screen share, and then she screen shared on the Lumiere website, the one that you guys all saw, on the part where it's just like my face. And then she's like, "Stephen, did you start this company?" And then I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You cannot do that. You can't do a PhD and run a company at the same time." And so actually what happened was I was planning to drop out at the end of that semester, but I wasn't quite ready yet at that point, because I was kind of like, "Oh, it's such a big deal to drop out." And she was like, "Hey, you can either take a leave of absence, or you can leave the company and just like, go on the board of directors." And it was such, at the time, I was so first of all, I was kind of like, it's like being found out like doing something bad by your parents, which is so silly in retrospect. But it was so liberating actually, because then I had to just make this decision, and it was really clear to me that, oh, I really am passionate about doing this startup, and I love research, I love academia, but just didn't feel like my path. And so I kind of got forced into the decision actually a little bit early, but it wasn't actually a difficult decision. But it was kind of, I just kind of got kicked out as well, to be honest. So it's like, yeah, I'm curious if they think they kicked me out or if not, but I think they kicked me out. It's somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Gupta, I hope I'm not like destroying.
No, this is good, because we tell the same thing to our PhD students, that they, it's good to follow your dreams, but you can't sort of try to do 2 or 3 things at once, just because the PhD program itself takes so long, and takes your full commitment. So that doesn't surprise me, to be honest.
Yeah.
But building on SKR's question, so the idea of having a backup plan never occurred to you?
So I think one of the gifts that I've been given in life is that one, my parents don't really like, I've never felt like I've not my parents have tons of money, but I've never felt like, oh, I've really like had a sense of like lacking, so that there's a sense of like just like psychological comfort I've had. And the second thing was that when I moved to Vietnam, I was working at a nonprofit in Vietnam. And so I was being paid like, I think I was being paid like $1,600 a month or something. And I was balling out. It was the best year. It was awesome. I was like doing whatever I wanted. I was traveling. I was having so much fun. I had a great place to stay in the middle of the city. And so I always felt like I could just fail as hard as possible, and I could just go back and make $1,600 a month and live an awesome life in Ho Chi Minh City. And so I really did not feel it was very risky. People talk about entrepreneurship as being very risky, but actually I never felt that. I always felt that I've been really blessed with a great education. Like I'm American, like that's a huge privilege in itself. And so I could always go get some job if I wanted to. And so I never felt like I needed like a backup plan, because my backup plan I felt was so awesome, to be honest. It was just like I was just going to be in Ho Chi Minh City living a great life, and now I'm also in Ho Chi Minh City living a great life, but it's like slightly different. I'm running this company. So that was really, I think that was actually a little gift for me. I think maybe if I'd been like in a really expensive place, if I'd been like living in Manhattan or something, and I was like getting crushed and I had this crazy rent, and like I'm sure it would have felt much scarier. But I think that was a big part of it. Yeah.
We'll sort of change gears here a little bit. So what were some of the major challenges you faced in starting and running this business?
Yeah. One of the big, maybe I just take you guys back in time a little bit to a really important decision point for me, which was a year into starting the business, we got an offer from a bigger education company to acquire us. And we had like I think we had over $1 million in revenue. We thought we were doing really well, but I was really nervous because we started in the middle of COVID, that I didn't know if this thing was going to just die. Like, to be honest, for the first few years, the way I felt was that every time we had like an application deadline, I was just like so nervous. I was like, this thing is going to die. I really felt that. And so when this action offer came, someone was like, hey, like, I think you want to buy your business, come work with us for a few years. We'll give you like, $10 million, let's say, or whatever. I was like, amazing, so crazy. And I struggled with that decision for months. And it really came from a place of a lack of confidence that this thing was something real that we built, and that it was just I really thought it was just a flash in the pan. Maybe it's just a COVID thing. No one's gonna want to do this after COVID. And I think the difficult part is being confident in yourself, to be honest, or being confident in what it is. I mean, I think it was, if now looking back, it was 100% the right decision. We didn't take the acquisition. I decided I was having way too much fun running this thing. I was learning too much. It would be too much of a cost for me. Even though it's great to have money. That's awesome too. But I think it was really hard to have that confidence that you're actually building something that people want and care about. And the funny thing is that a lot of my mentors just saw, they're like, oh, dude, your thing's like crushing it. Like, just keep running it. But I didn't feel that, because I was like, when you're in it, you feel like, oh, this thing's going to die at any moment. And now I think a few years later, the team's bigger. I don't feel that way. I feel like, oh, this thing's probably going to be fine if it doesn't keep growing as it's growing. But at the time, it felt existential for me.
Okay. And I know you mentioned, your parents are cool with whatever you do, but when you got the acquisition offer, were they like, well, take it, move on to other things?
Yeah, I really don't think it's hard to describe. It makes my parents sound uncaring, but they genuinely, it's not the lack of caring. I think they just don't. I was like, I remember I told them, I was like, Mom, $10 million, whatever it was. And she was like, that is so great. She's like, I just got a soy milk machine. I'm like, Mom, like, I'm talking to you about this like acquisition offer. So like, that's my family conversation. So I think, that is the one thing I think that, people who grew up and I'm actually curious for people here, if your families are like, business families. My family's certainly not. And so they just didn't really know. And so I think they could, so I think when they don't know, they actually do a really good job of just being like, hey, you know more than me, kind of step back and let me make the decision. But it was difficult because I didn't have many people I didn't have my parents weren't like my confidants, I would say, in like the decision-making process. I did talk to a couple mentors, and I would say almost unilaterally, the older mentors were like, oh, just go sell it. They're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Because I think they've seen some like war scars, and they're like, oh my God, get the money, like go, that sounds sick. And then the younger ones who are maybe like 5-10 years older than me were like, dude, you're like kind of running something, you're really liking it, you're learning a lot, you probably have a path to grow. And these are usually, I guess, they've been relatively successful. Maybe they haven't had that big loss. So they were more likely to say, hey, just keep running it. And, I think it turned out right that it was right to not sell it, because we continue to grow, probably worth probably more valuable now. And I really enjoyed the process, but it was interesting to observe like the different types of feedback, the advice that I got based on, how far down the line someone was.
That's interesting, where they were coming from in terms of advice. But Kyle had a question about your business partner. So Kyle, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, just like did you like how is it like working with others in Vietnam and stuff? I know that sounds like someone else's question from earlier, but like how is that?
Yeah, you also have a great name. So you could you and Sarah K. Rhodes, you guys, like, if you were to take it together at some point, like that could be powerful. So my co-founder, his name's Dhruva. So actually Dhruva was my classmate in undergrad. He's Indian. He grew up in Chennai, and then he went to Harvard, and then he's a really nice guy. So it may not directly address the question on like cultural differences, but just one thing that one big takeaway I've had about this co-founder relationship is we neither of us are like really perfect. Like we're obviously not perfect. Like there's lots of times when I think, and I'm sure you would think the same thing, where I'm like, dude, I wish this dude was better at like this thing, you know, what some strategy thing or like some technical thing or whatever. But what I found is that I really trust him. He's just a really good human. Like he's such a great guy. He's so nice. He's so kind. He's really caring to others. I think he's just a really trustworthy human. And that has really made all the difference for me, in that I feel like we both really trust each other. And I'm really willing to go on like a long-term journey with him. And we were actually not really close friends before we started, but I always felt like I could trust him. So that was a big takeaway for me. There's, you know, I don't think there's super big culture difference. He spent so much time in the US, like, but observing my other friends in startups and their founders, a lot of my friends are startup founders, and like, how much do you trust your partner is I think almost, I would say, is a better indicator of success than like, how much do you think your partner is like super talented or giving you all these resources, like all these things. You of course want them to be like, you know, competent and great, but like that trust level is huge. And for me, that's a big, huge gift, because now we have like, we're right now trying to figure out, for example, should we have like, we throw off money because we, you know, we're profitable, and so we're like, hey, should we just like give ourselves this money, or should we try to buy other businesses? That's like a big question we're trying to figure out right now. And it can be a really honest conversation. Like his family is like a middle-class family in India. He's like, hey dude, like some money would change my life, because it'll help me like, you know, pay for these things with like my family, you know. And I think that like that's it. And for me, I'm like, you know, I really want to go buy stuff, because I think that's really exciting. So I think being able to have those conversations with someone that you trust is like a completely different experience. So yeah, I think I totally didn't answer your question, Kyle, but I don't know if that, yeah.
Yeah, that was Kyle's question. What is it like working with your good friend as a business founder? So I think you answered that, but just want to clarify, when you say you like to go out and buy stuff, you mean you want to go out and buy companies, not stuff, not like
That's not stuff.
New car, new clothes, that kind of stuff.
Not yeah. I should probably buy new clothes. But yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go back to your early life. You grew up in Columbia, Missouri, typical small town, college town. Tell us about your time growing up, family, community, school. Were there any family members, you know, aunts, uncles, teachers who played an important role in how your career shaped up?
Well, you know, Dr. Gupta, we met in 2005, I think at Thanksgiving. That was a seminal moment for me, I would say. But, you know, excluding that moment, I sort of grew up in Columbia, Missouri, which I think is like almost, I was just looking at like Tuscaloosa's demographics. I think it must be like the exact same kind of vibe, like 100,000 people, like college towns are awesome, you know. Yeah, I'm sure it's super similar vibe. I had really, I had, you know, maybe two teachers who were really important to me, who would just like, you know, I think paved the way. I had one teacher who's like third, fourth grade, this guy, Mr. Coleman, who was just a legend, and he always encouraged like creative writing. And so that was a big part of my life, was like kind of being, like I was always a class clown. Honestly, I wasn't very good at school. But then I think he made me feel like, oh, you can do something that's like creative and cool. So that was like, I think, the first time in my life when I felt like, oh, I can do something cool. So that was a big move. And then the other person was this guy, Mr. Swift's my English teacher in 9th grade, and then again in 11th grade. And he had this, he kind of had this attitude where he really cared for me, but I always felt like he thought I was kind of an idiot as well. Like, not like I'm not intelligent, but that he was like, dude, you're making all these stupid decisions. Why aren't you like applying yourself? And for me, that was really big, because I really wasn't a good student up until 9th grade, at the end of 9th grade, 10th grade. And then he actually really sat me down for this conversation at the end of 9th grade. And but just say, hey dude, I think you're like not living up to your potential. And I just, you know, I don't think I could do that to someone, to be honest. Like, I'm like, you know, so conflict avoidant. I'd probably be like, you're so great, like I love you, you know, you have a great name or whatever. But he was just like, honest with me, and it really helped me out. And the next couple of years, I was really intense about school. Yeah, it helped me like, get really focused. I think that gave me a lot of opportunities later on in life. And so probably those two were like big. So one was more about like kind of like that expansive, like creative piece. The other was much more about like, hey, dude, there's some tough love of like, dude, you kind of suck. Why do you suck so much? You could be much better. So yeah.
Wonderful. And the Thanksgiving that Stephen is talking about was his parents' tradition of doing a Thanksgiving dinner at home and then inviting all of us international PhD students to their Thanksgiving dinner, which allowed us to meet the family. And back then, Stephen, of course, was very young, and we got to know them, and we got to see how Thanksgiving dinners were in the family. So his parents were very, very kind with those things. Yeah. So now, Stephen, entrepreneurship. These days, you go to college, you have entrepreneurship classes in college, and in many high schools, people have exposure to entrepreneurship. How was it back where you grew up? Was entrepreneurship something that was discussed in your family, college, friends, school,
Yeah.
high school, middle school?
Actually, I do a little survey. Actually, I'm really curious if you could just throw in the chat, like how, from the ages of 0 to 18, just like ballpark it, like how many entrepreneurs did you know? I'm really curious if you could just like throw in the chat, like how many entrepreneurs did you know? Like it could be like, you could just estimate, but I'm really curious, like what people will say. And then I'll say my number.
I'll create the poll. I'll do the poll now. But in the meantime, if you could answer that question, I can set up the poll in a minute.
Entrepreneur body count question. But yeah, how many entrepreneurs did you know? How many entrepreneurs did you know?
Okay. As I set it up, do you want to go ahead and answer the question?
Yeah. For me, I think I knew one. It was really not I felt like it was, in retrospect, I really like Columbia, Missouri. It's an amazing place. But I don't think entrepreneurship was like kind of in the air, was when I felt like. The person I knew it was my friend's dad ran this lawn mowing company called Atkins, which had this really catchy jingle called like "Should Have Called Atkins," and I guess he was crushing it in this, like, 'cause he had a really big house, and it was like this, I guess, big lawn mowing business, and that was, I think, my really only exposure to entrepreneurship. I'm trying to think if I had other, because it was much more of an academic environment growing up. So I in a lot of ways I feel like I wasn't exposed. Now the flip side is that and sorry, Dr. Gupta, for forcing you to make this poll. I'm just so curious. The flip side is that one thing I think, like, this is like my outside in perspective on growing up in the US, is the US is such an amazing training ground. If you went to high school in the US, you are like an entrepreneur. I think like you are so set up for success, because the high school and college system is like, you're doing clubs, you're in sports teams. It's so much like creating stuff, being together, creating these organizations, and classes, like for most people, it's kind of, I think, secondary to these like extracurricular stuff. I don't know if people agree with that or not. I'm curious. That was my experience. And I think that that's actually a great training ground for getting started. Like starting a club is the exact same thing as starting a company, except that instead of like ask people to pay you money, you just ask them to like come to your meeting, or you give them like a donut or something. Like that is, yeah, I am so curious about this.
So what I understand, Stephen, is that there wasn't much exposure to entrepreneurship growing up, but you feel the whole experience of going to middle school and high school in the US is entrepreneurial overall.
Yeah.
And what makes it entrepreneurial without sort of entrepreneurship being a part of it?
Well, I think that so I don't think I was exposed to like many entrepreneurs, but I do think that the process of like the school system in the US is set up that if you want to start something, if you want to start a club, like I'm sure a bunch of people in the chat have started like a club or something. That's a really entrepreneurial process. And high schools and I think colleges in the US really like encourage that. They're like, oh, you want to start a club? Cool, go start a club. A lot of high schools outside the US, I'm sure Dr. Gupta, like, I'm not sure where you went to high school, but like, what I've observed in Vietnam or in China or in India, it's like, you're like grinding towards a test. And so that's also great. That means you're learning a lot of these like discipline skills, but you're not set up in the environment of like creating and identifying a need. Like usually these clubs are like, hey, there's no one who's doing this thing. Let's start a thing to come together. You're learning these organization skills, learning how to motivate people, learning how to incentivize people. You're learning how to like, get something done. Often clubs are trying to get something done. I think that's a great practice for starting a business. And, I think it's a really cool part of the US high school and college system, which is like we really reward people for, creating stuff in high school and college. So,
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't heard that before. So thank you for that. That's interesting. Now, tell us about your time in college. You said you went to Harvard. So what was your major? Were you exposed to entrepreneurship in college?
yeah. Yeah. So I was exposed to entrepreneurship. So that I do feel like college was a big, here we go. Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think what the poll shows is that most people have been exposed to at least one or two entrepreneurs sort of growing up.
Yeah.
And sort of as the number goes higher, the number of people exposed to it sort of drops. But yeah. So about college, Stephen?
Yeah. So for me, like if you just like go on this like poll results, like for me, my number went from like 1 to like 50, like
in
within
college.
College. Yeah. So it was a really big change. I think Harvard is like, Harvard's a special place, but I think college is also that, where like people are beginning to think bigger. And yeah, a lot of my friends, like my best friend in the world is this guy, Greg. He's like that 6'5" guy in finance kind of like vibe. He's like tall and like beautiful and like really successful. And he's also a really like amazing person. And he's doing a startup right now. He's doing this like cool dev tools, like a developer tool. So he's like creating software to help other software engineers create better software. And he's my best friend. And we talk about our startups all the time. And it's such an awesome experience to share that with him. And so college for me was, I really lucked out in that it ended up being that the people I found really fun were other people who were kind of interested in entrepreneurship. And to be clear, none of my friends in college had started a business in college. So they were like, we started a club together. We did like create this dinner group together. We had like, internships at like interesting companies. They talked about it. And now, so I graduated like 7 years ago. So now 7 years, now maybe like 5 years later, a lot of them then started companies. But it was just much more in the ether of like, oh, like starting a company is a cool thing. And here's like the steps you can do it, particularly if you're studying business, or I was studying computer science. I ended up studying statistics. If you're studying one of these fields, then it's really it's just really in the air. So that was a big difference. It's for me, the number went from like 1 growing up to like 50 super quickly. And that was like a big unlock.
And then what did you do after graduation? Work life, where did you work? Where did you live after graduation?
Yeah, so I got advice from a professor mentor who said, hey, like if you want to, like first of all, if you want to go do a PhD in business, like you should maybe work at a business. I thought that was interesting. And then he said, the thing I would optimize for is just pick the very best company you could work for. Like don't even care about what it does, just pick the best organization, because you're going to benchmark for the rest of your life off of that organization. So it's a really high leverage thing to pick. And so I applied to like 40 companies. I think I applied to 38 companies. I got rejected from 36. I ended up getting an offer from McKinsey, which was awesome. I also got an offer from Tencent, which is this big Chinese tech company. I ended up choosing McKinsey. I felt like this is like, it's a really cool company. It's like it's kind of like we'll call it like the CEO factory. And it was a really good decision. Like McKinsey is like a really intense place. It's like this management consulting company. People don't know about it. It's like a management consulting company. They essentially advise CEOs on like strategy, usually big Fortune like 1,000 companies. They cost a lot of money. Like a team of 2 or 3 people could cost like a $2 million, $3 million for like 6 weeks. It's like insane. So they really like brought in for these big business decisions. And as a young person, you're entered into it, and then you're working on these projects, and it's it's really intense. But it was just a really great, I think, baseline experience for me to be like, okay, this is what a really good organization looks like. And then it also grants, I think, a little bit of like legitimacy when I started the company to say, hey, I'm like young, but I have these experiences, and like, I'm kind of legit. So like maybe you should trust me if you want to work with me. Or so yeah, that was my experience. And then I was in Boston for a year, and then I really actually found Boston. It was a lovely place, but I got a little bit bored. I felt like a little confined. And so then I transferred to China just to get more exposure. And so that was when I was in China for about a year, which was
So
interesting.
you graduated with a statistics major, statistics degree, and then what did you do for McKinsey?
So at first I worked as a kind of data scientist for McKinsey. So that was the first thing I did. And then I realized that McKinsey is like one of these places where like actually it's not cool to be a tech person. Like that's super not cool. It's much cooler to be like a generalist consultant, like to be like the main person. So I ended up switching to be a consultant after about a year, because I realized what I was doing was not the cool thing, which actually I think an organization really matters, because if you're not doing the cool thing, then you're really limited in your growth, and you're always seen as kind of like a supporting actor essentially to kind of the main thing. So yeah, so and I was working with like, I ended up, it's so random. I ended up doing all this like fashion related stuff. So I was like really like a fashion consultant, but I'm really not interested in fashion. So it was a terrible alignment, but I ended up that you just get put on the same projects, the same people. So that was my like 2 years doing consulting.
Okay. And you mentioned that a lot of your classmates from Harvard then, now run their own startups. So is it that in college at Harvard, you were learning some skills for running and managing your own business? I find it difficult to imagine that a statistics major, no matter where he or she is really learning many entrepreneurship skills in college. So can you help us understand?
Yeah, I think, and I was reflecting on this question that you shared with me before. Can people type in the chat actually, or can they not?
Well, we can ask them to type. What are you curious about?
I'm just curious if people could like throw in the chat, like, what do you think you're learning in college that will help you build a business? Like, and you could say nothing. I'm just curious for other people what your perspectives are on that, and I can share.
Well, now I'm curious about that too, so I'll type it in, but go ahead, you can answer the question. I'll type up the question.
Yeah, just throw in the chat if you have it. Or I don't know if people can type in the chat. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I'll type it in the chat and then people can respond. But yeah, go.
For me, in college, by the way, statistics, people think it sucks. I'm sure many of you guys don't like statistics. I think it's awesome. I think it's so useful. I do think that like having Charlie Munger calls it like numerical fluency, super nice. So just feeling like if you can look at a problem, like a lot of sales is just like funnels, like person comes to sees your website. What chance do they then click on this link? What chance do they then, talk to a sales rep? What chance do they then pay you money? It's just like a statistical funnel. So actually I find like just having like basic feeling comfortable with like number statistics, super useful for like navigating pretty I'm so curious. You can just throw in your chat, like just like type something. Maybe you can just type like a word or 2 words. Maybe we can, but anyway, so I think that was useful. To be honest, even more useful though was when I was in college. The the most valuable thing I got was I started this club. It was like a dinner group, and no one wanted to join it because we just started it. It was kind of lame. So I spent so much time sending these ridiculous emails out to like email list servers. And I was just pounding these email list servers to be like, hey, sign up for this club. It's super cool. I tried all these different types of copy. I like, had these memes. I tried to make it seem sexy, and practicing email marketing is so useful. Honestly, like I use that skill all the time. How do you write emails that compel people to want to do the thing that you're a part of? So not really related to class, but I do think like a lot of like when you see someone like hustling to get a club off the ground, that's like really useful. Okay, I'm actually cool with people saying networking, strategic planning.
I think networking is probably the most common answer in what people have answered. Connections and networking. So, okay, so what you got from college, I'm still trying to sort of get to that. So persistence or marketing, or what do you, what would
Yeah,
you?
so there's definitely like numerical fluency. That's a big one. If I just go back, it's numerical fluency. I think marketing is a big one, which is like, I had these clubs I wanted people to join. So I figured out how to like scrape email lists, send out emails, go over like email list servers, I like handed out flyers, for like dozens of hours. So I was just grinding on these clubs. And I didn't realize at the time that I was starting essentially a business, but it was just a club. And I was learning all the things of business development. That's the second big one. And then the third one I do think is like, I didn't mention this, but people talk about networking. I really agree with that. But I think for me, more important than networking is like networking is often like, oh, this person's gonna do you a favor. I actually don't think that's that useful. I mean, sometimes it's useful, but it's not that useful. I think much more useful is this feeling of like looking at someone who's crushing, who's doing really successful, and then realizing that they were like they just got broken up with, or that they just, you know, got drunk last night at some party that you thought was lame, so you didn't go to. Like, why does that matter? It sounds random. It's because when you see someone who's crushing it, you're like, oh my God, this person's doing so well. And then you realize this person is just a person and they kind of are normal and they're not so much smarter than me, or they're not that much better than me. Then it really changes your expectations of what's possible. So for me, that was a big unlock, especially at Harvard, where there's, you know, just any environment where you're surrounded by really talented people and they're just your friends. And then you realize, oh, you're really talented, but you're also just kind of like a normal person. And so that raised the bar for me. And I think about this a lot because one of my good friends is this guy, Jamie Beaton. He runs this like huge education company. It's worth like $600 million called Crimson Education. And we met in visiting days. And he's just like this total nerd. He loves like Warhammer. He's a really great person. And I felt like, oh, when I saw that Jamie could start a company, I mean, Jamie's probably way smarter than me, but it felt like, oh, I could probably do that too. So to me, that's like the networking piece. I don't think it's about the favors, but it's more about like, who do you benchmark yourself to? That was a huge unlock, I think, in college.
Wonderful. And after we finish our talk, I'm going to look up what Warhammer is and what Warhammer has to do with being nerdy. I'm assuming most of the students know, but I have to admit I don't know, so I'll look it up. But one of our students, Joseph, had a question about you and your interest in stand-up comedy. So Joseph, you want to go ahead and ask?
Yeah, how did you gain interest in doing stand-up comedy?
Yeah. So I have this really random side thing where I do stand-up comedy in Vietnamese, which is, but if you want a life hack of how do you become #1 in something, like go to Vietnam or somewhere in Southeast Asia, learn a language, and then be like a random like white or Latino person doing it. It's like amazing, like, or whatever. Just don't be like Vietnamese and do it. You really like dominate a niche quite quickly. What happened actually, Joseph, is that I went to it's about 2 years ago. I went to a show here in Vietnam. There's one really like, popular comedy group. And I just went to the show and it was so fun. It was in Vietnamese. And I was like, I didn't understand like half of it. But I thought, fuck, like if I at some point I could perform, that would be like an insane thing, you know? So that'd be so fun. And so then I was genuinely just like a simp on this group for the next year. I would like show up to their meetings. They didn't even invite me. Like I literally would invite myself to their meeting every week until I would go to their open mics. I'd perform like in front of like 6 people. Like no one showed up to these open mics until eventually they were like, hey, like the founder was like, hey, are you interested in stand-up comedy? And I was like, of course, I'm like simping on you for a year. And so then he finally invited me into the group. And it's just such a fun, it's so fun. I don't know if you guys have tried stand-up comedy or improv comedy. It's so fun. It's like, it's insane how much you can fail. Like the feeling of telling a joke and no one laughing is just an incredible it's an incredible feeling of pain. Like, so it's really funny actually. But it was really interesting, and honestly, I love it. I have such a great time. And now in Vietnam, like some of my clips are going. I mean, this is. I mean, who cares, right? I'm like, you don't care about the Vietnam context, but like some of these clips had 20 million views on TikTok. It's like insane. And so in Vietnam now on the streets, people are like, "Oh, Steven, you're the comedy guy." Like it's so random, and I just love life, but to have like random paths like that, you know. So for me, it was like a fun experience, random. Like I don't want to be a comedian. That's not my like life goal, but I think it's a great thing to try out, and it's really you learn a lot. And because I sit in this like weird niche of like white dude in Vietnam, there's no competition whatsoever, and so that's also fun. So yeah, highly encourage you guys to move to Vietnam and do stand-up comedy. If you guys consider that.
Is it okay, Stephen, if after the conversation I share your email address with the students? So if they want to talk about Vietnam or life outside the US?
I'll just throw that chat as well.
Okay, well, perfect. So before we move sort of towards the last part of the session, which is questions about advice, one of the things we want to ask you is, what are your future plans for the business? You didn't sell it when you had the chance. Do you want to, we in class, we've talked about how Netflix didn't sell, how, Amazon didn't sell, and they preferred to build the business. So is that what you are going after? What's your goal?
Yeah. So just like short term, I think for us as a company, what we'll end up doing very tactically is the game we're trying to learn right now is how do you use your money to acquire other companies. That involves maybe like taking loans, that involves like how do you integrate a new company, that involves valuing companies, it involves like taking cash flow and compounding it. So like kind of Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, we're trying to play this like long compounding game on building the company. So that's a big thing that I'm doing. And that's and then I think in the medium term, we'll probably consider doing stuff like starting an online high school or something, like going more into like accredited education. For me, I really love running this thing. It's so fun because I get to live an interesting life here. I love my team. I think it's really fun and challenging. And so I actually don't know if I sold the company, it had like some awesome amount of money. I just don't know what I think I would really lose a lot more than I gained, to be honest. And so that may be a bad financial decision, probably is a bad financial decision. But I think like life is kind of about living what you want to live. And so for me, I just really enjoy doing this thing. And so I can't imagine selling it. So that's probably it. We have some like plans for how to grow the company, but like really just like on a personal level, it's more like, and that's a really cool thing with an entrepreneur, by the way, is that you decide your own fate, especially if you don't take funders. Like you get to choose the life that you want to live. And for me, that's the most attractive thing about entrepreneurship. I think it's actually very similar, Dr. Coop, to being a professor. Actually, I think that's one thing people don't talk about is like, those are two very similar professions. One is about, exploring the unknown of a product, those are exploring the unknown of knowledge, and they both are highly autonomous, choosing your own fate. Like it's really, I think so in a lot of ways it does connect back to my dad, but
your dad would have been proud to hear that, proud to hear you say that. Now, Stephen, again, before we get into sort of advising, advice related questions, one of the questions that we got from students, and I saw on YouTube and stuff, you sort of delved deeper into this issue, is difference between doing business in Vietnam, starting as an entrepreneur in Vietnam and in the US. And just to sort of, prime you on where I'm hoping you'll go with this is, on LinkedIn, you talked about how in the US, you need to have a really big idea versus in Vietnam, you don't. So could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this idea, my friend, just this turn of phrase with my friends, which I really liked, was that like in the US is like the land of these like crazy dreams. It's like, let me build a company that's going to take us to Mars, or let me create like the world's biggest social network, or let me organize the world's information. So in the US, like no opportunity is too big. Like you can do anything in the US, I feel like. And in Vietnam, Vietnam is a land of like the banh mi seller. It's like some auntie who's like in her 50s who's like, there should be like a banh mi right here. And she's like, has her cart, she's selling you banh mi. And she's like, you know, found the niche, is actually crushing it, you know, or someone who's like, oh, like, you know, there's I know someone here who like is like a weirdly successful, like selling like gook. It's like the green slime. And they sell tons of slime in the US. It's like when it was a big thing, like I think they made millions of dollars actually. It's kind of insane. And so in Vietnam, no opportunity is too small. And so I really like that, which is like in Vietnam, if there's an opportunity, and a lot of developing countries are like this, to be honest, but Vietnam is particularly like this, like if there's a small opportunity, someone's going to go after it and like just take it. And I really like that vibe. For me, to be honest, growing up, like, you know, in Missouri, when I heard of entrepreneurs, I just thought of like Mark Zuckerberg. And, you know, we may have a resemblance in like our fashion and like, you know, face. But like this guy's like so different. Like, I'm never going to build that, you know? And so I was like, fuck, I'm not gonna be an entrepreneur because I can't build like some, you know, $100 billion company or whatever. When I came to Vietnam, I felt like, oh, actually, being an entrepreneur is just about identifying an opportunity and something that you could help out other people to do. And it doesn't need to be massive. It can just be a really small thing, it can be a banh mi seller. And that's an amazing thing to do. And so to me, that was a really big unlock. It actually made me so much more comfortable starting a company, leaving the US context. Some places in the US are better at this, but like, you know, just the environment I was in the US and then being in Vietnam, I felt like, oh my God, I can just start something small. It's cool. So that was, I think, the biggest learning that yeah.
Wonderful. Meg, you had a question about advice? Meg Fullen?
Yes. So I know a lot of us in here are seniors, including myself. What is your biggest piece of advice to someone who wants to move somewhere different for a job?
Oh my God, cool. Are you thinking about that, Meg?
Kind of. I don't really know. My life's a mess, so I don't know.
It's a mess. It's a mess. And where would you move, by the way, Meg? I'm just so curious. Like, you don't have to answer.
Definitely somewhere in the South. I'm just not really sure.
Like potentially somewhere you haven't lived before.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, like if you're thinking about that, that's awesome, and I think it's really adventurous and cool. And if you do it, I think I'm sure you'll have a great experience. So I had that experience. Well, actually, what happened, by the way, is I didn't do that, Meg. So like if you do it, like you'll be better than me. I was in Boston in college. I stayed in Boston for my first year after graduation. Honestly, what I felt was after graduation, after that first year, I was like, man, I kind of messed up. I should have moved somewhere because I'm like I'm in the same like stench of my past 4 years. I don't know, that's kind of a terrible way to say it, but like I didn't feel like I was being pushed to try something new. And so that's actually why I ended up moving. If you do move to a new city, I think I have just two quick tactical pieces of advice. One is that you're going to be moving with a cohort of people who also likely don't have any friends in that city. And so one strategy that I take is assuming that everyone's a loser and then like throwing parties and being like, I assume you have nothing to do this Friday. Like I'm going to throw a party. And then by doing that, they usually are losers, you know, just like, you know, myself. And so they usually don't have something to do. And so they usually come. And so that's great, actually. Like if you can be the proactive person in a new city, because I think sometimes you go to a new city, you're trying to find your community. You're like, I'm looking for this group. I'm gonna like enter, it's gonna be mine. I think a much easier and safer approach is to say, hey, I'm gonna try to create it. And it could just be the random 3 people that you meet. And you're like, hey, you like want to do a little dinner party at my place. I found that's really, really powerful. The other tactical piece of advice is that while you do that, don't your college friend, for me, my college friends are my most important friends. And those people often will stay with you. Or maybe it's your high school friends for you. But those old friends will stay with you and can stay with you for your whole life. And so creating rituals to see them, get together. My college roommate and I have this really nerdy tradition, a really cute tradition where we actually work out over Zoom Monday, Wednesday, Friday together. Like we go on a run together. It's like a phone call. And that's a really nice tradition where we just stay connected with each other. So if you can figure out a way to do that as well, I would encourage that while you're going to a new place and having, of course, you know, adventurous life, which I'm sure you have. Right? Which would be awesome.
Thank you.
And Meg is one of our good students. I'm sure she's going to move to a nice place and have a good career and a good life there. So I have no doubt about that. So Erin, you had a question about advise also? Erin Stansbury?
Hi, yes. My question was just kind of about like navigating like post grad and like early career. I think like especially for entrepreneurship, it's kind of like a question of like should you kind of like go and be like a slave to corporate America for a few years and kind of like learn like how things run and then kind of like start your own venture? Or like is it more beneficial just to kind of like hit the ground running and like immediately post grad, like just try to get like the business idea you have like off your feet and just kind of like navigating kind of like the pros and cons of both?
And is that something you're considering yourself? Or is this something I'm more like?
Not really, but I think it's interesting. But yeah.
Totally. Totally. But I think it's like, there's actually like a form of this question, which is like for everyone applies, which is like, when do I have to pay my dues and when can I do the thing? You know, like we all are asking that question of ourselves like all the time. I do think you usually have to pay your dues in the sense that like there's the entrepreneurship example, which I know a little bit better, but I'm sure for all of our lives, I think that there's essentially the same thing. It's like, especially when you're new to an environment, to think that you're like gonna, which you totally could, but think that you're just gonna like go out and just crush it, having not kind of like been in it, I think is not impossible, and definitely doable, but a little bit like for most people, it doesn't work super well. And to be honest, like having observed my classmates, I have like two groups of classmates who have started companies now. One group started companies immediately after college, and one group works for 2 or 3 years at usually like pretty good companies, and then they started to start companies. And the second group is doing so much better than the first group, like in terms of their company success. And I do think you get a lot out of getting exposed to what a good company is like. Like the hardest optimization problems are often like stopping problems though. So like when do you stop paying your dues and start doing the thing? And so that is hard. It's often earlier than I think most people do, to be honest. But I don't think it's like you just never pay your dues. So I do think there's a piece of doing paying your dues. Like I guess the optimizer, I don't know, I could say like 2-3 years and then go do it. It really is going to vary by people. But I do think it's pay your dues. But just make sure that you're intentional about that if there is something else you really want to do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. One of the tasks I have to do when I do these virtual visits is keep an eye on the clock, and we are headed towards 12:15, which is the finish time for our class. So let me ask you the last question. Is there any advice you would have beyond sort of what we've already discussed for our students who are about to graduate college?
Yeah.
What would you advise them?
So, okay, this is like a random piece of advice. So I'm just going to share by the way, my LinkedIn and my email in the chat. And I really mean it when I say like, send me a message if I can be helpful at all, like look through my LinkedIn network, if I can introduce you to someone, whatever, like, or just you want to talk, I'm super happy to. And I really genuinely mean that. One thing that I've really liked, and I offer this just because of my, like, I think I'm like probably 9 years or 10 years older than most people, like most of you guys, is I really like that age difference, actually. That's like my favorite age difference for relationships. And the reason I say that is because it's just far enough for someone to kind of see the path ahead, but not so far enough for someone to kind of like not remember what it's like to be in your shoes. And vice versa, by the way, it goes the other way where I'm like, oh, like I relate to you as a college student because I was a college student not that long ago, like 7 years ago, whatever. But your college student experience is different than mine. And so there's a lot of stuff that I can learn as well. And so I offer it, and I want to be helpful, and also it's very selfish. I love connecting people who are like kind of in that age gap with me, because it's kind of hard to meet people in that age gap, and also it's like you also get a lot. And if you guys are looking for jobs, by the way, we're hiring a ton as well. If you want to move to Asia, you get a job in Asia. Like I'm actually I'd love to be a proponent of that as well. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn or send me an email if that could be useful for you in your life. But thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. Thank you so much for having me. It's really such a pleasure. These are great questions.
Thank you, Stephen. I enjoyed listening to you, and I'm sure the students did as well. As Stephen said, if you want to stay in touch with him on LinkedIn, email, or even call him, feel free to do so. And with that, thank you, Stephen, and thank you everyone for showing up today.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a nice morning.
Thanks,
Good day.
Steven.
Bye.
Thank you.